but participate, make suggestions, things like that. And even as a 6-year-old, I mean, my dad was having to read the lines at the read-through, and I would just kind of sit there at first. My father rants.
There is a particular kind of resilience that Hollywood rarely rewards with its own story. The industry tends to celebrate the explosive, the scandalous, the beautiful wreckage. It builds monuments to the tortured genius and names awards after the ones who burned the brightest before burning out. But there's another category of survivor, the one who kept showing up, kept learning, kept building, and that man is Ron Howard. To the world, Ron Howard is the embodiment of stability in an industry defined by its instability. He is the freckled kid from Mayberry, the straight-arrow teenager from Milwaukee, and the Oscar-winning director who never seemed to lose his moral compass regardless of the chaos swirling around him. He grew up in public, aging from Opie Taylor to Richie Cunningham to one of the most commercially and critically successful filmmakers in Hollywood history, all without a single addiction scandal, no explosive public meltdown, no trail of burned bridges. He is, by every visible measure, the nice guy who finished first. But here's the question that nobody asks loudly enough. How does a nice guy survive Hollywood? Because the industry that produced Ron Howard also produced some of its most legendary and terrifying personalities. He didn't build his career in a vacuum. He built it in rooms occupied by people who ruled those rooms like emperors, who treated vulnerability as weakness and kindness as an invitation to be steamrolled. To understand who Ron Howard became as a director, his famous egalitarianism, his collaborative instincts, his insistence on a warm set, you have to understand who he was forced to navigate on the way there. In his memoir, The Boys, a memoir of Hollywood and family, co-written with his brother Clint Howard and published in 2021, Ron Howard offered rare candor about his extraordinary childhood in the entertainment industry. He described a career that began practically in diapers. His first film role came when he was just 4 years old and unfolded over 6 decades in a business that eats its young. What emerges from that book and from decades of interviews is a portrait of a man who absorbed difficult, sometimes frightening people with the same methodical patience he later brought to his film sets. Each encounter left a mark. Each difficult personality became a lesson. This is the story of 6 of those encounters. 6 actors who, in their own uniquely complicated ways, showed Ron Howard the sharpest and darkest edges of Hollywood's golden age, and in doing so, shaped him into the director he became. Before we talk about the woman who played Aunt Bee, we need to understand what Aunt Bee represented to the American public. When the Andy Griffith Show premiered on CBS in October 1960, Frances Bavier stepped into the role of the warm, fussing, pickle-obsessed maiden aunt and instantly became one of television's most beloved maternal figures. For millions of families watching in black and white, Aunt Bee was domestic grace personified, the woman who always had supper ready, who worried appropriately, and whose greatest concern was whether the household was running smoothly. She won an Emmy Award for the role in 1967. She was Mayberry's beating heart. And yet for young Ronnie Howard, the red-headed boy playing Opie Taylor beside her, the reality of Frances Bavier was a confusing and sometimes painful introduction to the idea that a person and a character are 2 entirely different things. Bavier was born in 1902 near Gramercy Park in New York City. She trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and graduated in 1925, going on to build a legitimate Broadway career that included performing for U.S. troops in the Pacific during World War II. Her final Broadway role was in Point of No Return alongside Henry Fonda, a production that ran for 356 performances. She was not a dabbler or a dilettante. She was a classically trained stage actress who had paid her dues in the most demanding theatrical tradition America had to offer. And then she became Aunt Bee. And Aunt Bee, to her profound discomfort, swallowed everything else. As she told the Carolina Camera Program in a rare interview, it is very difficult for an actress or an actor to create a role and be so identified that you as a person no longer exist and all the recognition you get is for a part that's created on the screen. She had spent decades mastering the craft of the theater and found herself permanently reduced, in the public imagination, to a woman in a house dress worrying about her pickles. The resentment this produced was real, and it bled directly into her behavior on set. According to IMDb and multiple cast members interviewed over the years, Frances Bavier was remembered as difficult, temperamental, and somewhat cold behind the scenes of a show that projected nothing but warmth. Andy Griffith himself, the undisputed star and moral center of the production, once admitted, "There was just something about me she did not like." Howard Morris, the actor who played Ernest T. Bass and also directed 8 episodes of the show, compared working with Bavier to stepping on a landmine. A simple request, like asking her to move slightly to adjust the camera frame, could trigger an explosive refusal. The show's executive producer Sheldon Leonard described her as a rather remote lady. Highly professional and a fine comedienne, fine actress with very individual character. She was rather self-contained and was not part of the general hijinks that centered upon Andy on the set. For the young Ron Howard, this was his first real encounter with the disconnect between public warmth and private coldness. In a 2006 interview with the Archive of American Television, Howard was characteristically measured but revealing. She kept to herself. Frances very much kept to herself. She was a New York stage actress, and I think she always loved the job and appreciated it was a big success, and was extremely professional. But I don't think she ever felt a part of what these boys were up to and their shenanigans. He also noted, in various recollections over the years, that he didn't think Bavier particularly enjoyed being around children, a striking admission given that their entire on-screen relationship was built on the illusion of familial love. The poignant coda to Bavier's story came in 1972, when Griffith and Howard made a personal visit to Bavier at her retirement home in Siler City, North Carolina, a town she had chosen precisely because of its resemblance to the fictional Mayberry she had inhabited for a decade. According to IMDb's production trivia, she turned them away at the door, having consistently declined to participate in reunion events. The two men drove away without going inside. She never made peace with her fame during her active years. But something broke open in the final months of her life. In 1989, dying of congestive heart failure, Frances Bavier called Andy Griffith. According to Griffith, who recounted the conversation on Larry King Live in 2003, she apologized for being difficult during their years together. "I'm sorry we didn't get along better," she told him. "It was my fault. I just wish we had." For Ron Howard, Bavier was the foundational lesson. Professionalism and happiness are not the same thing. A person can deliver a technically perfect performance and still be suffering profoundly. If Frances Bavier represented the cold, inward resentment of a stage actress who felt misplaced, Yul Brynner represented something almost opposite, a blazing, outward declaration of absolute superiority that made no concessions for anyone in the room. Ron Howard's encounter with Brynner came in 1959 on the set of the film The Journey, when Howard was approximately 4 years old. He would later recount the experience in The Boys, noting that his very first professional film appearance placed him in the orbit of one of the most intimidating personalities in the history of cinema. Brynner had won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The King and I in 1957, and he wore that honor and the aura it created with absolute conviction. He was not a man who compartmentalized his performances. The imperious, shaved-headed king he played on screen was not left at the studio when the camera stopped. Brynner moved through the world as though every room were his throne room, and every person in it a subject who owed him deference. His physical presence was overwhelming, his voice commanded silence, and his attention, when he chose to give it, felt like sunlight, and his displeasure felt like a sudden storm. For a 4-year-old from an Oklahoma family of modest origins, fresh to the film industry, and accustomed to the warm, grounded guidance of his father Rance Howard, Yul Brynner was a genuinely frightening force. Howard recalled in his memoir feeling that Brynner didn't look at people so much as look through them, a cultivated technique designed to maintain the status differential between himself and everyone else on set. Crew members who had worked on dozens of films moved carefully around Brynner's moods. The lighting had to be right. The energy had to be appropriate. His displeasure wasn't a conversation, it was a climate change. Brynner was a product of the old studio system at its most indulgent, a system that treated certain stars as deities and structured entire productions around their comfort and ego. In that system, Brynner had been allowed, even encouraged, to believe that his genius absolved him of ordinary social obligations. He was photographically talented, deeply cultured, and genuinely brilliant in ways that extended well beyond acting. But these qualities served primarily to reinforce his separation from the common people around him, rather than to build any kind of collaborative warmth. What Howard observed, even at the age of 4, was the atmosphere that a single dominant ego creates on a professional set, how it silences innovation, suppresses the natural camaraderie that makes creative work sustainable, and turns a group of talented professionals into anxious satellites orbiting one star. Decades later, Howard's sets would become famous for being almost the photographic negative of a Brynner production. Egalitarian, warm, creatively open, and marked by the director's deliberate effort to make every crew member feel like a valued participant in the collective effort. When you understand Brynner, you understand why. Howard has spoken of the Brynner encounter not with bitterness, but with the clarity of a man who filed the experience carefully and used it constructively. The emperor model of filmmaking, ruling by intimidation, commanding by fear, might produce powerful performances in the short run, but creates a brittle environment where people are too guarded to take risks. Brynner showed Howard, before he was old enough to articulate it, that the biggest star in the room is not always the strongest leader. By 1982, Ron Howard was standing at the most consequential crossroads of his professional life. He was no longer a child actor or a television lead. He was a young director, 28 years old, given the opportunity to make Night Shift, a Warner Brothers comedy about two morgue attendants who accidentally run a call-girl operation out of the city morgue. It was an absurd premise that required a delicate tonal balance, and it needed a cast capable of grounding the comedy in genuine human feeling. He assembled Michael Keaton in one of his first major film roles, Henry Winkler as the straight man, and Shelley Long as the female lead. Long was, at the time, one of the most critically respected comedic actresses working in television. Her performance as Diane Chambers on Cheers, a role she was developing simultaneously with Night Shift, was already generating industry attention for its remarkable combination of intellectual comedy and emotional precision. She was genuinely, undeniably talented. She was also, by multiple industry accounts, extraordinarily demanding as a collaborator. Long came from the rigorous improvisational tradition of Chicago's Second City, a training ground that emphasizes intellectual deconstruction, character motivation, and the asking of questions, always more questions, about why a character does what they do. This is a noble and useful instinct in rehearsal. On a film set with a tight schedule and a budget that does not allow for philosophical deep dives on every scene, it becomes something considerably more complicated. Industry accounts from that era, and from Long's later work on Cheers, describe an actress whose commitment to her own process could dominate and sometimes derail the production around her. She was not a diva in the traditional fur coat and tantrum sense. She was, in a way, more difficult than that. She was a perfectionist whose pursuit of personal excellence made her oblivious, at times, to the needs and rhythms of the ensemble around her. The result on Night Shift was a production that Howard has described as a daily negotiation between momentum and a star's relentless need for reassurance and re-examination. For Howard, who had been raised in the high-efficiency world of sitcom production, where every minute of shooting time had a measurable dollar value, Long's process was an education in managing the psychological needs of a deeply analytical performer. He could not simply override her concerns. She was too talented, and her instincts too valuable. He had to learn to validate her process while simultaneously protecting the energy and tempo of the film. He had to become, in a sense, a translator between the schedule's needs and an actress's internal demands. Long's performance in Night Shift is genuinely excellent. She brings a vulnerability and warmth to the role of Belinda that a less committed actress might have skated past. The friction, as Howard would later reflect, produced real quality. But the experience crystallized for him a critical directorial truth: being liked by your cast is not the same as leading them. A director who allows any single performer's process to consume the production has abdicated leadership in the name of harmony. Howard learned, through the struggle of Night Shift, to be what he would later call not just a nice guy, but a clear guy, someone who respects every performer's process without surrendering the authority to keep the production moving forward. If Shelley Long's challenge was a slow intellectual pressure, Russell Crowe's was a direct confrontation. When Howard cast Crowe in A Beautiful Mind in 2001, he was inviting onto his set one of the most intense, demanding, and mercurial actors working in cinema, a man fresh off his Academy Award win for Gladiator and already established as a performer who brought not just talent but total, immersive commitment to every role he inhabited.